Here we go. Hello, hello, everybody, and welcome back to Women of Color in Intimate Conversation. So today's guest, we have some similarities. One in particular, her first name is my nickname. So I'll mention what her name is when we get to that point. So that's kind of fun, and I'll refer to her that way, doctor, adding that, of course. So, this podcast is all about empowering women of color. And so I have guests on who have journeys that will do just that. And so today's guest is definitely going to empower us with her journey, a unique conversation. So haven't had this conversation before, but definitely the experience is something that I know a lot of you resonates with you. And as I share with her prior, something I've experienced as well, just differently, but something new for me. So today's conversation is intimate, it's tender, and it's transformative. And so let's get to it. We are joined by Dr. Wendy Ashley. She is a nationally recognized Black and biracial clinician, professor, author, change agent, and department chair of the Master of Social Work program at California State University, Northridge. Dr. Ashley is known for her work in anti-racist clinical practice, intersectionality, and trauma-informed care. But today, she's bringing us something even more personal, her story, her truths, her journeys navigating identity in a world that often demands monoracial clarity. So her new book explores biracial identity, anti-Blackness, white supremacy, and light skin privilege, but as reclamation, healing, and belonging. Dreamers, this one is powerful. So again, let's get into it. Dr. Ashley, Dr. Wendy, welcome. I'm so
Thank you.
honored to have you.
Thank you for having me. I know my name is confusing, right? I have all those first names.
Yeah, right,
And people are like,
right.
is it Wendy? Is it Ashley? Either one is fine. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, yes. So, for listeners who may be new to your work, who is Dr. Wendy Ashley? Beyond the titles, beyond the accolades, who are you at your core?
It's a challenging question for me because my work is so much a part of my identity. So there's a lot of overlap and also separation between my personal and my professional selves. But if I think about like beyond the titles, I think of myself as a listener. I think of myself as a witness. I think of myself as a storyteller. I think of myself as a bridge builder. In my life, I try to lead with compassion. I try to protect what is sacred. I try to challenge injustice without abandoning humanity. What motivates me is the possibility that what I'm doing will open a door, will ease a burden, will spark critical consciousness, and nurture people's voices. So that's kind of at my core who I am.
Oh, thank you so much for that. So what I'm hearing, people talk about work-life balance. It was always integrated for me. And it sounds like it's kind of integrated for you as well. You mentioned personal, professional, and how, things are interwoven.
Yeah. I'm trying to find that work-life balance, right? Because when your work is service, at my core, I'm a therapist. So it's hard to draw hard boundaries between personal and professional. It's essential to draw boundaries, but it's really hard to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I fully understand. So, your book again, and what we're gonna kind of focus on is your biracial identity. So,
Yep.
how has it shaped the way you've learned to move through the world?
I think that my biracial identity it's something that early I wasn't as aware of. Like I knew that I was different. And it's funny when I think about what it taught me early on is it taught me that I was different. It
Mm.
taught me that people saw me as different. And because they didn't know what to do with me, there would be lots of questions. And so because of that, I have always sort of had to my observation skills had to get really good. I had to be able to anticipate if somebody liked me, if they were approving, if they
Mm.
wanted me to be in a space. Like I had to read those cues long before I had language to any of that. So, whether it came to whether it was about my academic career, whether it was about social situations, whether it was about dating, like that ability to observe and assess and then sort of move forward accordingly was absolutely something that I learned early on because of my identities, I believe.
Yeah. And so what were some of the like early messages that you received?
So I was raised primarily by my mother, who is a white woman. And so, you know, and my relationship with my dad was primarily like evenings, or I'm sorry, weekends and
Mm.
holidays. And so I spent most of my time with my mother. And so my life was and I went to a very small private school. So I was very much in a white world.
Yeah.
And it was very clear to me that I didn't fit, that people were, and it would be not just me by myself, but it would be with my mother. They would be like, wait, what are we doing? And so there would be questions. Is she adopted? Oh, who are her parents? Like there would be, and I would look at other people and I would see that they look like their parents, or people didn't get questions like that. I always got questions like that. And it would always cause a level of scrutiny and discomfort that was really hard for me.
Yeah.
So that was a huge, and when I went to my dad's house, it was not so much like that. Because when Black folks look all different shades,
Right.
right? So I didn't get that the same way, but for sure I got that in, going to the grocery store, in our community, going to school. And so the messaging early on was that, and even in my school, especially because it was a predominantly, there was a lot of different racial backgrounds, but it was mostly white school. it
Hmm.
was it was very clear to me that I was different and the differences weren't positive.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. So, what you just said is what I want to tap into as far as some things that I've recently started thinking about. But before we go there, you mentioned that your mom is white, so basically ways raised that way. And so I've been seeing on social media how people have pointed out the differences of being raised by a white mom
Versus
with
a
a
black
black
mom.
dad. Exactly. And
Yeah.
so, I'm sure you came across this in your research. So talk a little bit about that before I go into my experience.
Yeah, mothers typically are the ones that socialize their children,
Mm.
right? And so that is the metric that people use a lot of times. Like, who is your mom? Is your mom white mom? Is your mom
Mhm.
black mom? With the idea that if you had a white mom, you were socialized in a much more white way, and if you had a black mom, you were socialized in a much more black way. But the truth is, it depends on who socialized you. Like, I know tons of people who grew up without a mother and a white father,
Mm.
or you know what I mean? So it really, or who transracially adopted by two white parents. So it really is, it's less about who your mother is, and more about, or maybe your grandparents raised you, right? It's really
Yeah.
about who raised you and who socialized you. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't believe, let me back it up. I believe that it is really hard for a monoracial person to raise a biracial child, whether black or white. I think it's easier for a black parent to racialize a biracial child if they are black, white, biracial, because most black biracial kids look like they have some black in them.
Hmm.
But I have plenty of friends who were raised by either biracial parents or by black parents, and they were more white appearing, and it was really hard for them. So again, it's not as easy to just say if then. It becomes much more complicated based on what the phenotypical features are in the child, and then how the parent is racializing them. And when you are one race and you live as one thing, it is a lot easier to raise kids who look like you to be like that. When the kids are two different, very polarized races, I think it becomes much more challenging for parents to know what to do in those cases.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that now, with social media and seeing the differences and seeing, women who they definitely look black, and then their kids don't. Like,
Right.
I'm starting to see more of that, and it would make sense how people are like, okay, confused about, okay, now whose kid are you holding? So, starting to see that. And I
Right.
know initially, like, again, black. So I'm like, I'm black, and wherever I show up, I'm going to show up as black. And so I didn't, early on, initially even think about experiences that a person who is biracial, how they may go through life, right? Some of the things that you probably question, and not only just what you question, but also what you experience. So never thought about that, because me, I moved through the world as a black person. I am a
Right.
black woman, right? I was a black girl, and that's just how I moved through the world. And anybody else who's black, I just felt they all moved the same way. And of course, that is not the situation.
Right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and to add to that, right? Like it was clear early on that I was these two races, and one was never going to be an option for me. Like
Hmm.
no matter nobody was ever going to see me as white. That was never going to be a thing. So, back in the 80s and the 70s when I was a kid, it wasn't like I claimed a biracial identity. Like I knew early on I was black.
Yeah.
And the only person that didn't know that was my mother. Everybody else knew that, but she didn't. So it became this dance of like who I was with the rest of the world and who I was with my mother, which is quite complicated, which I'm sure we'll come back to. Go ahead. I want to hear
Yeah,
what you
yeah.
said.
And so what I'm starting to experience now, and I'm looking at it more from a global perspective. So two different things. One, so I travel internationally, and when I do, I'm always looking for Black spaces. And so I'll join a Facebook group, Black folks in whatever that country is. And so I happened to have joined one for Lisbon, Portugal. And a person had posted something about how, Black there is not the same. They more or less, identify by, like where they're from, Cape Verdean, so on and so forth. I'm like, oh, okay, that's a different perspective. And then a couple of weeks ago, I was in Toronto. And when I was at a table with these guys, one of them was like, okay, so what you got going on? The indigenous, African, like you got a little Chinese going on. I've never experienced that because, as I stated, wherever I show up, I've always been black. And
Right.
right, and primary, maybe in the US, that's been my experience. And so it got me to thinking, and then everyone that I met that to me they were black, they were Barbados, Bayesian from Barbados, I'm Kenyan, I'm
Wow.
from Uganda. I'm from Ghana. And it was like, nan one of them said they were Canadian. And so it got me thinking and wanted me to really look into my heritage. Like, where do my folks come from? Like, we all know that, yeah, somebody came from Africa. Don't know who, right? Because I don't know anything beyond like grandparents, they were down south. I don't know anything beyond that. And so that's what I'm starting to think about being global, a Black woman globally, right? So those are the spaces that I'm now starting to enter and think about.
It's so interesting because it's a flip, right? Like
Yeah.
like here you are this or you're this, right?
Mhm.
And it's a little bit different now, obviously in 2025. Folks are embracing multiracial identities in a different way. But I had the same experience when I went to South Africa. Like my husband and I went, and my husband is browner than I am. And it was very clear that even though apartheid is no longer a thing,
Mhm.
it's still a thing. And
Mhm.
so they were some we went to a winery and some folks were like, "Oh yeah, here you're colored and he's black." And like and it was very clear in how people treated me that that was a thing. So
Yeah.
I do think it's very different depending on where you go. And that's interesting how that was for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see as I continue. But like I said, I'm starting to really think about that and wanting to know more about my past. And it's also very glaring because I don't. And I think that, that's typical of Black folks in the US. And it's so unfortunate. Like they knew, right? They knew where they were from. And then probably because most of them, they're only maybe one generation from being in
Right,
that country that
right.
they speak of. Yeah, and we have a totally different experience, right?
Well, and I think with the advent of like the ancestry and the 23andMe, I think it those people start to be able to trace like
Yeah.
their family systems in very different ways. And it's a little bit sort of I don't know, otherworldly and surreal to see that you were like all these things
Hmm.
that you never knew you were.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so you talk about the idea of liminal space, that
Yeah,
in between existing that doesn't fit neatly into the categories the world tries to put us in.
yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So when did you first become aware of that in between space in your own life?
Like I was saying a few seconds ago, I sort of always knew that I didn't fit into either space. Like I wasn't white and I wasn't black when I
Hmm.
was a kid. Obviously that changed over the years, but when I talk about liminal spaces, I talk about them like this. Like when you are going from the first floor in a house to the second floor, the stairwell is a liminal space. Yes, it's between the first floor and the second floor, and nobody cares. You go from one floor to the second floor. It's only a problem if you get stuck on the stairwell,
Mm.
right? And so for me, the dynamic was like being trapped between two floors. I couldn't get to one and I couldn't get to the other. And so, as a kid, I think all kids, they look at their parents, they look to see themselves, they look, oh, I have your nose or I have your hair. And when I looked at my parents, none of those things I don't have either one of my parents' hair. I don't have their faces. I don't have their skin color. I don't look like either one of them. And because I'm an only child, it was very hard for me to feel like who do I belong to in this? So before I had words to articulate it, that was sort of how I understood that liminal space of like not fitting, not being like either one. And so, feeling connected, feeling seen, feeling validated was something that didn't come from me looking at them.
And are those some of the silences that you talk about? Or is
You
that
know,
something different?
that's something a little different. That's
Okay.
something a little different. Yeah.
So
You
let's
want me to
kind
talk
of
about
let's
that?
get into the silences then.
Okay. So, as I was saying, my mother had primary custody of me. My parents were actually really never together in my life. They divorced when I was 2 and they separated when I was a baby.
Okay.
So, like I said, the socialization, learning about values, learning about manners, learning about grooming, learning about etiquette really came from my mom. And my mom, it's funny, I was thinking about this as I was thinking about your questions. Like the one thing my mother said about my race was like, you're not black, you're not white, you're brown. This is what she said.
Okay.
And that's it. She didn't talk about my color ever. She didn't talk about race ever. It was really about like you're both.
Hmm.
And what is funny is when I think about just fast forwarding, my mom got remarried and we moved to Whittier, and the area that we lived in was like 98% Latino. And but what I saw was that everybody was the same color as me. Like they
Hmm.
were all various shades of brown. I didn't realize that brown was a different brown until I got there, right? And so, but to back up, but because, my parents look so different, and because I was under this impression, like that I was somehow both, like I wasn't prepared for people
Mm.
asking questions. And so, because my mother never said anything else, she didn't answer. Like when people would say, "Is she adopted?" She would say no, but she didn't explain. She didn't talk about it. She didn't prepare me for other kids' questions. She didn't do any of that. So I sort of went into the world completely unprepared and completely unable to have the language to articulate what my experience was.
Yeah.
And so like I was saying to you earlier, when I was with my father when I was a kid, people didn't ask the same questions, but they would want to know, like, they could obviously see that I was something else was mixed in there.
Yeah.
Again, phenotypical features, or hair or skin or texture are all things that people use to as sort of metrics for what somebody is. So, but my father never talked about race either. And
Hmm.
it wasn't until later that I realized that my grandfather was very like, he was very colorist. And so he would
Mm.
say like really negative things to my grandmother about her color. My father was the lightest of his siblings. He was the only boy, and he was very much encouraged to be with somebody as light as possible or white. So,
Mm.
he was given those messages early. So he didn't talk about race. So I never really got those messages. I never got any messages about what I was or how to manage that, because they didn't talk about it.
Right.
And then later, when I would start to talk about like bullying or microaggressions, they both would either talk about their own experiences, were not at all mine, or they would dismiss them. So there was a lot of silence around race in general.
Wow. So much going on, right? Like you just started a whole nother conversation, which I believe we are going to touch on a little bit, the colorism, but
Yeah.
whoa, right? A
Right.
lot going on. And and you saying neither one of them, they didn't talk about it. They didn't have the language. They didn't know. Those weren't
No,
their experiences, right? Your dad probably a little
no.
bit more closer
Yes.
to you than definitely your mom. She totally had no clue, right? She was totally
No.
out of her depth. And so your stepfather, was he Hispanic?
No, he was white.
Oh,
So we went, so like picture it, right? So we went from a duo where white mom, brown kid, beige kid, to family of five, where
oh,
four of the five are white and me. And so like we would go to restaurants and we would be standing in line and they would be like party of four.
right, right.
And my mother would never even acknowledge that that was a thing. Like she didn't say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." She'd be like, "No, there's five of us." Ha ha ha. Like it was always sort
Mm.
of like minimized or dismissed, and never a realization that I would need some like support or acknowledgement or anything.
Did you ever have a conversation?
In adulthood, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but my mother still can't. Like I
Mm.
want to say, maybe like 20 years ago, she was because my husband is black and my children are black and my life is black. And so I want to say that like we were and let me just say that when I was a kid, most of my bigger holidays were spent with my father. So
Okay.
like Thanksgiving was with my father, Christmas was both. And so like my traditions are very black. And
Hmm.
so as an adult, my mother had asked me something about like, what was I gonna do for Thanksgiving? And I was like, we're going to Leo's family, is my husband. And I remember her saying, why do you prefer them to me? Like,
Oh,
and this was her only effort to say, and I was like, what are you talking about? And she was like, you like your black family better. And I started to try to unpack with her that it wasn't that I like them better, but that is my racial experience.
hmm.
And she just couldn't hear it. She started crying.
Oh.
Like it was very much, well, it's, I wish I had more compassion. It sort of feels like white fragility and it feels like too much too
Right.
late,
I know, because you was
you
like, yeah,
know?
uh-huh.
Right, right. I was
Yeah.
like, okay,
Too bad for
and
you. So sad.
right. Well, and what I really wanted to say to her was, why did you not have this conversation, 40, 50 years ago when
Hmm.
I needed it?
Yeah. Like you
You
knew I was
know?
different. You knew I'm telling you these things and you can see it for yourself. Like, why did you hide from that? And
Right.
when you're talking, I'm thinking about, did you see the Netflix uh about Colin Kaepernick? Did you watch
Oh
that?
no, I've been meaning to watch that one. I hadn't seen that one.
That man, that one there. So when you were talking just now, how she was dismissive, didn't see it, like downplayed it, that was his experience. Like watching that, it
Wow.
was just like, wow. There was one, there was one scene that kind of stands out to me. So Kiki, he loved Kiki. It was the black girl, obviously, right? He loved Kiki. And I think they went to the prom or something. So there was a picture of him and Kiki. And the mother, I believe it was the adopted mother, the white mother, she put it away in a drawer. So they were sending him messages of what they valued, and they didn't value him with Kiki.
Wow.
Then
Yeah.
when he went to the prom again, whatever this dance was with a white girl, oh, they celebrated it. They took pictures. They were just so happy about it.
Wow. Wow. You
Yeah.
know what's crazy is that I never got that from my mother's family. Like I never and her parents were very opposed to her being with a black man. They
Hmm.
cut her off for a few years and then there was like some reconciliation, but I didn't date anybody black until high school.
Okay.
And at the end of my high school experience, I had a black boyfriend, and from then on, I didn't look back. But she was never like, don't date that. There was never any disparaging.
Yeah.
There was never any of that. But I really think it's what you were saying earlier. Like, I don't think she has the language to talk about race at all.
Hmm.
It isn't just to denigrate blackness. I think it's because she just doesn't know how to talk about it. And the difference is my mother really thinks that I look just like her.
Mm,
Like,
okay.
and we look nothing alike, like nothing alike. But I think that's the key. I think it's that as if she starts to talk about race, if she starts to acknowledge the difference, then that means we're not alike, and she doesn't know how to tolerate that.
Yeah.
That's my belief.
Wow. So with her family, right? So they didn't want her with someone black, and you said they cut her off for a period of time. When they did finally embrace her, how was your experience with them?
They were delightful.
Okay.
I never knew that it was a thing. I never knew that like that was something my mother, again, talk about silence. I didn't know about any of this till I became an adult. And then she told me a little bit of the history. My aunt also, so she dated and got pregnant by a Puerto Rican man. So my cousins are half Puerto Rican. They look very much the same color as me.
Okay.
Just different hair.
Mm,
And she cut her off too. So my grandparent, my grandmother, my grandfather. So there was reconciliation. They were lovely to us. But we didn't, I think that that separation was harmful to my mother. It made her feel bad. And so I think that she kept her, I don't think she enjoyed her parents very much, but from
mm.
what I understand, they were much nicer to me than they were to her.
Got it. Got it. So you didn't
Yeah.
really notice and experience any of what your mom had experienced.
No, but you know, when I think about it, it's a good question because when I think about how much contact I had with them, I maybe was over my grandparents like 40 times my whole life. I
Okay.
spent weeks and summers with my paternal grandmother. My grandmother lived in Compton, and I would go for a couple weeks in the summer with her.
Okay.
And so I had a much closer, more consistent relationship with her than I did with my mom's parents.
Got it. Yeah, which makes sense.
And they died like before I got to college.
Okay.
So there wasn't like an ongoing relationship into my adulthood with them.
And then, so what about other family members, right? Because you just mentioned your mom's sister married a Puerto Rican man.
Well,
Like,
she
what
had
about
children with him. She didn't get
had
married to him.
children? Like, what about
Yeah.
her siblings though?
My mother has
Experience.
she has five siblings. And yeah, I mean, they only two of them had kids.
Okay.
The other two, so there's three girls and two boys. The three girls had kids. My Puerto Rican cousins, I grew up very closely with, so I'm still in contact with them. But the others really didn't have. There was one other cousin that I'm sort of in social media contact with. He is all white. But
Mm,
other than that, like that, yeah, the rest of them didn't have kids. And so I have been close on and off with my aunts and uncles. But you know, it's funny when my grand was it my grandfather when my grandfather died, my grandfather died. So half of my family lives in Arizona, and the funeral was in Arizona, and we went to and I think I was in college. It was my first year in college. Went with my mom. We stayed in Arizona, and it was right around the time where Arizona was contesting, celebrating Martin Luther
uh,
King Jr. Day. Remember that?
yeah.
And so we were there, and you know, we happened to because you know you don't have nothing else to talk about at a funeral but nonsense. So we start talking about that because it was in the paper. And I remember one of my aunts or uncles, I have never experienced any like N-word or any
Hmm.
weird racist stuff. There was some comments from my uncle, I think it was, or maybe it was my cousin's boyfriend. Somebody said something about why would we honor that holiday? And I
Mm,
remember being so upset and feeling like, oh my God, like my family is a bunch of racists.
yeah.
Because nobody said anything to like acknowledge that we weren't all white in the room and like why were we doing this? And everybody just got silent. And it was clear to me that A, the whole family didn't know how to talk about it,
Yeah.
but B, there was more to it than what I understood.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. All right. So you take on some topics many people avoid: anti-blackness, whiteness, proximity to whiteness, and a truth about light skin privilege.
Yeah,
So, and the question was going to be what made you decide to confront these, but your life experience, right?
right.
Everything that you growing up, not really understanding where you fit in the world and having, white mom raising you that way, and then your dad's side and having that full black experience. So, I'm sure that all of that contributed to why you chose to take this on. What other specific reasons led you to take this on?
You mean in the book?
In the book, yes, and just in general.
Well, so you know, it's taken me a lot of years to sort of make sense out of all of these experiences, right? Like as we're talking, I have my experience in my childhood. I have my experiences with each of my parents. I have holidays, like all of the school dynamics. I have all those things. And so I didn't really have anywhere to put this for a really
Hmm.
long time. And, I've written a lot of articles. I published some things, and I knew at some point that I needed to have something to say about this. But it wasn't until I started working with clients that had some of these issues. It wasn't until I started sort of talking about it, bringing it up a little bit in conversation. Because again, for many years, my identity was Black. I
Yeah.
didn't say biracial because it was just too complicated. And when I started to talk about these things, and I started to realize that so many other people had feelings about this and had dynamics about this and had concerns and comments and voices, that I started thinking that something needed to be written about it.
Yeah.
And then when I started to research, like, what was I going to say? Did I even have anything to say? I started realizing that it was important to include, because I have not escaped white supremacy because I'm biracial. It's still
Mhm.
a very important dynamic. European beauty standards still impact me. I have not escaped anti-Blackness. I'm still Black, right? Even though I'm biracial. And the thing that has been sort of divisive between me and other Black people is the light-skinned privilege piece. And so it
Mhm.
was important to me that in writing this book that I talked about all of those, because they all impact my life experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what I want to focus on, because again, this podcast is about empowering others, women of color, Black women in particular. So you describe this book as an act of reclamation, a decision to stop suppressing parts of your identity and finally speak your truths. So what truths did you finally allow yourself to say out loud?
I never wanted to hurt anybody. And I'm over here, confessing my most intimate secrets about my parents. And I didn't want to hurt my parents. Like I didn't want to critique them they did the best they could, right? I didn't want to do that. I also didn't want to talk about some of the painful experiences that I had with other Black women.
Mm,
One of the things that came up over and over again was like these weird dynamics and I was always, like I said, studying, do you like me? Do you not like me? And there would often be sort of weird, unnamed tension with other Black women.
mhm,
And I didn't know how to talk about that. I didn't know what authenticity policing was. I didn't know why people were testing me. Wendy, do you know what song this is? Wendy, do you know
mm,
how to do this dance? Wendy, do you know anything about this? Do you know about South Africa? Do you know about like I didn't and I was like, why is everybody am I in an Africana studies class? Like I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what that was. And so it took me that one of the truths for me was to recognize that how I look makes people feel a certain way. Whether it's because it reminds them of ways that they've been treated,
mm,
whether it reminds them of what they think about biracial people. A lot of people have experiences with biracial people because biracial people are treated differently.
yeah,
So that is activating for folks. I think the truths about just, acknowledging that all biracial people aren't confused. I think a lot of people are walking around thinking that biracial people are confused. No, I think they're not confused about themselves. They're confused about how to relate to the world. So
right.
those were some truths that I think came up for me in wanting to get my voice out there.
And you mentioned that, the work that you do, that you were, in your conversations with other people, that you're finding out, oh, it wasn't just my experience. Like other people are having the same experience as well. That's part of, why you wrote your book. What surprised you in your conversations with other people?
That's a great question. What did surprise me? I think that I have spent, over 50 years thinking that a lot of these stories were just me. And to your questions earlier, I blamed my parents. I blamed their dynamics. I didn't realize that, and I had my own idea, like, right, like I wanted to be Lisa Bonet. I wanted to be Vanessa Williams. I wanted to be the girls that I saw. I wanted to be Logan Browning. Like I wanted to be these women who had this big, beautiful, bouncy hair and these perfect features. And I've always felt like I fell short. And what I wasn't prepared for was how awkward and how isolated and how lonely all these other folks were. I also was not, what I found surprising is that so many people couldn't find their communities. Like, I think because this is an isolating experience for a lot of folks, being biracial and not feeling like there was a level of connection. And so I thought that everybody else had their people, they had their communities. And so I think that was one of the biggest surprises that I found is that a lot of people were still searching for their communities and not finding them.
Yeah, and you know what? And those experiences are whether, we're biracial, fully a thing, we're all searching, right? And
Right.
again, that's part of why, this podcast exists to empower us
Yes.
on our journey to go ahead and find out what brings us joy and to focus on that. So, as we begin to wrap, your journey mirrors so much of what we talk about here on this podcast, choosing yourself, reclaiming your voice, embracing your whole identity. What does living fully look like for you now?
Such a good question. I wrote myself some notes because I didn't want to forget. I think living fully for me, one of the pieces is honoring my whole self, like you said, without altering it to kind of appease or please or make somebody else comfortable. Like I learned how to do that. I learned that my mom only wanted to hear these parts of me, or
Mm,
my dad's family wanted these. And I don't have to pick a side. Like I am a Black woman, but I do have biracial heritage. So I don't have to justify my belonging. I don't have to translate my existence for people that don't know my experiences. Like you said earlier, my book is really about reckoning with silence, or me having to disconnect from myself to make myself smaller so that I could fit. Living fully for me also means that I'm not going to disappear. I'm going to take space up with my complexity, with my Blackness, with my biracialness, with my spirituality, with my grief, with my joy, with my softness. It means that I can allow myself to exist without explanation, without needing permission, without apologizing. I did a lot of apologizing in my early
mm.
years. It's about me claiming wholeness. It's about me choosing to be myself without having to perform. Um,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I love everything that you said, and everything is exactly why, again, this podcast exists. Also, why I've created a community for Black women 50 plus to do all those things, take up space, live fully, tap into our joy. So, before we say goodbye to our dreamers, Dr. Wendy, what's one word you want to leave the those who are listening or watching with?
Hmm. The word that I grapple most with for myself is surrender. Like
Mm,
I have had to let go of all the things that I want to control and handle and manage and deal with. But I think the other word that I love so much right now that I'm really embracing is healing.
love
Because
it.
I think that all of us have to find our journey to healing. And that is it's both an individual journey, it's also a collective journey.
I love that. Dr. Wendy Ashley, thank you so much for lending your voice on women of color in intimate conversation. And to dreamers, thank you for listening, watching. Until next time, keep dreaming, designing, and driving the life you deserve. Thank you so much. And Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, all the things.
Same to you. Thanks so much.
Bye.